Hi, this is Dr. Hudson. This presentation is designed to help you master the historical thinking skill, understanding the ethical dimensions of history. Here I've listed the 6 historical thinking skills that we'll focus on in this course. This helps you put this particular skill in a broader context. When is war the right choice? Should children ever be taken from their parents? Should illegal immigrants be allowed to become citizens? Does the war on drugs create more problems than it solves? How about health care? Is that a right? What responsibility do we have to remember and honor the suffering of those in the past? These ethical questions and countless others confront us frequently. This is a section division. When you reach a slide like this, the presentation will automatically stop, and you decide if you want to continue with the new section, which is titled, or if you prefer to go back and review the previous section. The central question for this skill is, how can we learn from the past to help us better confront ethical dilemmas of the present? And the answer, by understanding the ethical dimensions of history. One of the 6 historical thinking skills you will develop and demonstrate in this course. One of the ethical dimensions of history involves assessing the morality of past actions. And here's some examples. What about the Mexican-American War? Was that morally justifiable to just go in and provoke a war and take that land from Mexico? What about excluding Chinese from entering the United States, the only ethnic group to completely keep out of the country? What about Native American children? Was it morally wrong to have taken these children from their reservations and put them in boarding schools and required them to cut their hair and speak English? Another ethical dimension involves answering present ethical questions with history as a resource. For example, current questions. What responsibility do state and federal governments have to protect our nation's water supply? Then we would look to history to see what responsibility have state and federal governments taken in the past to protect the nation's drinking water. Another ethical dimension involves considering what, if any, responsibilities exist in the present because of past atrocities. An example of that might be the mission of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It's there to remember the Holocaust victims and therefore prevent similar tragedies in the future. Another example would be the United States government paid reparations to descendants of Japanese who were forced into U.S. internment camps during the Second World War. This section defines the skill basics. All historical thinking skills involve asking questions. Understanding the ethical dimensions of history requires asking questions that will help you distinguish, identify, and evaluate. 2 of these skills work together well: identify and distinguish. You want to be able to identify or recognize moral judgments in historical accounts, and you want to be able to distinguish moral judgments from other types of judgments. Examples of some non-moral judgments would be economic, environmental, or perhaps political. If you would like some examples of these, just click here. Otherwise, you can skip the examples. Here are some examples of statements, one which is a moral judgment, one on the same topic that is not. So in the right column, here are 3 statements that are all moral judgments. You can see military spending in peacetime is wrong. 19th century industries were justified in harming the environment, and FDR should be condemned. Okay, now pair that with a statement on the left. Okay, military spending after World War II contributed to the post-war economic expansion. Okay, that's an economic judgment, different from a moral judgment. The second one, the 19th century industrialization polluted the air and water. That is a judgment, an environmental judgment, different from a moral judgment. And then the last one, again about FDR. FDR's support of New Deal legislation aided in the economic recovery during the Great Depression. Okay, also a judgment, but a political one rather than a moral one. So look at these and notice the difference. Pause if you want more time here. An additional skill that's essential for understanding the ethical dimensions of history is to evaluate the actions of people in the past in their historical context. It's not necessary to pit the present against the past. When there's a conflict from the past, there were a whole range of views presented at the time. So it's important to identify the groups and individuals involved in a conflict. For example, there were critics of slavery when slavery existed. So we don't have to judge it from the present. We can judge it by the standards in their own time. This section adds complexity to the skill basics. Just when you think it's clear that we should not impose contemporary standards on people in the past, it turns out it's not quite that clear. We have to balance the ethical dimensions with taking historical perspective. The risk in making judgments about the past is the probability of imposing contemporary standards of right and wrong on the past. Yet, meaningful history can't simply view with detachment Nazis, brutal slaveholders, perpetuators of genocide, just to name a few. But the key is these are judgments, and they have to weigh these two competing issues. This section offers a concluding mantra. Always remember, history is not learning facts. Historical thinking, in this case understanding the ethical dimensions of history, requires that you think, that you ask questions, that you make judgments that require reasoning, and that you explain those judgments. Yet historical thinking is not simply issuing opinions, which are personal preferences, but historical thinking leads to interpretations. Interpretations that reflect a point of view that can be challenged and disputed. History is controversial.